I am extremely honoured and grateful to have here someone whose work I have been reading and treasuring for a long time now. That is the amazing Margaret Kimberley. Margaret is an editor and a senior columnist at Black Agenda Report, which you can check out yourself at blackagendareport.com. She is a fearless and authentic voice that runs truly contrary to mainstream narratives, and she represents a long history of anti-war activism and struggle against what we would call the elite. Thank you so much, Margaret, for being here on the stream and for your solidarity with Julian.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. I'm very honored that you asked me to be a guest.
I know that you will have a really unique perspective, and I'm so pleased to have you join the Vigil, and I certainly hope to have you back again in the future, because I think that we need to hear from as many different voices and perspectives as possible. Julian and WikiLeaks have touched lives all around the world. They've touched many different cultures and many different countries. I'm really interested to know, to start off, Margaret, what was it that first drew you to Julian Assange and WikiLeaks?
Well, it's very funny. I realized that people I didn't like him either. So, which is not always a good gauge, but it's a start. I realized that he was telling truths that powerful people did not want to have revealed. During the Iraq War at first, that is why he was hated. He was telling the world that the United States and its allies that participated in the invasion of Iraq had committed a war crime. And he put a human face on this catastrophe, this crime. The American media is so complicit in all of our government's activities. The fact that reporters were embedded in Iraq, I think they made a decision that never again would they allow the press to be independent if the US military were involved somewhere in the world. And that made Julian Assange and people like him very dangerous. We got this flag waving from our corporate media, marching in lockstep. You know, we're always told about, if you turn on YouTube now, it tells you that RT is financed by the Russian government. It doesn't say the same thing for the BBC or other government operated outlets. But there is this illusion that we have a free press, and we do not. Our corporate media is not free. They operate by telling us things that powerful people want us to know and hiding any counter narrative. So when someone like Julian Assange comes along and tells us the truth, that person becomes marked. And they were determined to get him somehow. And they have been trying to do that for many years.
Yeah, there's this really strange dichotomy where they've got him in such a terrible position, physically in such a terrible position, where he is suffering so much. And yet the flip side of that is that they've been going after him for 8 years. You know, the Pentagon manhunt for Julian Assange was launched in 2010. And I would think there's not many people on this planet who those guys decide they want to get their hands on, and 8 years later still aren't able to quite get their hands on. So you've got to wonder, where is this going to go? Like Julian himself actually said that people, and I'm paraphrasing, but that people of deep moral and ethical fiber don't tend to live very long. And would you assume you would agree with that?
Well, yeah, there's an old song, I fought the law and the law won, the system is unforgiving and relentless, and people who take it on as he has done are marked. And, he's made a lie out of everything Americans like to believe about their country, that it's a democracy. Well, they let us vote, but that alone does not make a country democratic. We have, as I said before, a government and big business and media who all work together, who all work hand in hand. And we find out it's not a democracy when someone crosses them. So when Edward Snowden, who had a right, it's American law, international law, to seek asylum, and the Obama administration prevented him, actually forced down a plane that was on its way to, I can't recall if it was Bolivia. They thought he might have been on that plane, threatened countries to make sure they didn't give him asylum. So this was a violation of our laws, international law, moral laws, but it didn't count when it came time to get someone who they felt was going to hurt the system, who did hurt the system, but that's a good thing.
So the veneer of democracy and the veneer of international law fall away really quickly once they decide that they really seriously want to persecute someone. And so, as we've just discussed, people who stand up against them are marked and targeted and made to suffer. Mm-hmm. And yet, generation after generation, we still stand up and fight against them. So why is that, and why is it so important?
I think it's something that, I think it's part of the human makeup to struggle for independence. And some people choose not to. Some people, what do they say? Ignorance is bliss. Some people, just choose to pretend that, as what did we say when we were kids, la, 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 I can't hear you, just pay attention, don't pay attention, act like nothing is going on. But there are always people who choose to fight. If you look throughout history, the various struggles here in the United States, from the founding of this country as a colonial settler state, the indigenous people struggled, the first group of people persecuted, alongside them were enslaved Africans struggled. There were always attempts to escape, attempts to rebel, to revolt. So, and all over the world, I could go on and on, but I think it's something intrinsic to humanity to want to be independent, to want to be free, to want to speak out. And that's a good thing. These days, it's ironically harder. We have the technology, to, as you and I are doing it right now, to talk to one another. But at the same time, people like Julian are used as an excuse to censor. And the election, the whole Russiagate and Russophobia is being pushed as a way to silence people on so many issues. So it's something we always struggle against, but there are always new ways to try to oppress people, and we have to double down on our efforts.
So tell us a little bit about Black Agenda Report. They're so strong in their anti-war stance, which is something that particularly attracts me to them. Mm-hmm. But also because I see Black Agenda Report taking on, almost calling out almost everyone, no matter from which sector of politics they come from, mm-hmm. When they're crossing that moral line. What gives you that moral fiber to do that?
Well, Black Agenda Report, as we say, we're dedicated to analyzing politics of Black Americans, actually in the diaspora around the world, from a left perspective. And that's a proud tradition that our people have. Black Americans were always the most left-leaning group in the country because of our experience. We were always the people least likely to be in favor of a war. Always the group of people who had this tradition of this radical tradition that suffered a lot when Obama became president. When speaking of Iraq, Black people were the group least likely to be in favor of invading Iraq. And that was part of our tradition. But then Obama becomes president, and he does what other presidents do. He's no different. So he destroys Libya and tries to destroy Syria. But the same people who would have opposed a white president doing the same thing out of a sense of racial solidarity, and many attacks on him were racist in nature, felt the need to defend him. So his presidency was very harmful to our political growth. And Black Agenda Report, we did not change our politics because he became the president. We Started in 2006, Glenn Ford and Bruce Dixon and myself. And we've been joined by others, Ajamu Baraka, Danny Haifong, and Garrison. I'm sure I'm leaving somebody out. That's always dangerous when you start listing people. But we are leftists. We're not Democrats. We are on the left. I think it's fair to say that we're all socialists. And that means we are in opposition to our government and to other governments around the world who take part in these imperial adventures. And we speak up no matter who commits these crimes. We call them crimes. And that crime might be the invasion of a country. The crime might be using jihadists as proxies to destroy Libya. Imagine that. So the first Black president ended up bringing slavery to an African country. And that's something many people don't want to talk about, but we don't shrink from it. And we didn't let Trump scare us into supporting Hillary Clinton. She's a very, very dangerous person. And the Democratic Party is very dangerous. And their corruption has made them incompetent as a political party. It's their fault that Donald Trump won. And that's one of the reasons they're whipping up this Russophobia frenzy to cover themselves for their missteps, which led to his being elected. And that's one of the things that Julian Assange is involved in, the leak of the emails from the Democratic National Committee, which doesn't bother me at all. People needed to know what they were up to. And in response, of course, they have to smear the effort, smear Julian, and diminish what it was those emails told us about this party, which sets itself up as the progressive party, as the peace party, as the party for equality. And it's none of those things. So those are the things that impress me about Julian and WikiLeaks. And I think it's funny when Hillary Clinton referred to WikiLeaks as Russian WikiLeaks, to try to defend herself because she doesn't have the decency to disappear, having messed up so badly. So she has to have her hand in and keep messing things up. But at any rate, so that he played a very important role. And Black Agenda Report is always supportive of a free press, a press that we don't really have. We have a corporate media that's more and more consolidated. We have 6 corporations that control most of what we see, read, and hear. And so we have to support Julian Assange and others like him because we want to tell our truth, to expose the criminality, to expose the criminals in the high places, to expose those people who go along with them and who enable them. So obviously, Julian Assange being a journalist, and I always tell people, he is a journalist. If you believe in freedom of the press, then you should be in favor of freedom for Julian Assange and not believe what you've been told, that he's a Russian spy, that he's all the horrible things that are said about him. So what Julian has done over all these years and what we try to do every week in Black Agenda Report are quite compatible.
I can definitely see the parallels there because WikiLeaks has taken on Bush, WikiLeaks has taken on Obama, WikiLeaks has taken on Clinton. And something that very few people realize is that WikiLeaks actually did take on Trump. Because when WikiLeaks published the DNC leaks, in the DNC leaks from Hillary Clinton's camp is all of the opposition research documents on Trump. And in those opposition research documents, when I took the time to actually go through them, was all of the super PAC funding for the Trump campaign. And we were able to actually go through those spreadsheets and to go then track and identify all of the donors to the Trump campaign and to see a lot more about his network and what was going on. So while there is this narrative about the DNC leaks that it was harmful to Clinton, if all of these journalists moaning about it had actually taken the time to properly go through those documents, they could have made a meal out of the information that's in there about Trump already. So I just point that out. But yeah, it's amazing to see that parallel, that Black Agenda Report is prepared to take that principled stand and to equally analyse and call out anyone, be it from the Republicans or the Democrats, or even in the social activism sphere I've seen you do, which is just as important. And so is WikiLeaks, and that's definitely parallel. There's something else that just struck me there when you were speaking, and it reminds me of our Māori heritage. Our Indigenous people in New Zealand were deprived of education, they were deprived of information, because a key component of the enslavement of nations is that deprivation of information. And so I'm wondering, and of education, and I'm wondering, does that mean that the access to real information that WikiLeaks provides can be even more valuable to marginalized communities?
Oh, sure, absolutely. I mean, the things that WikiLeaks reveals about governments, about corporations, about their relationships with each other, about war, these are things that they don't put them in the paper for a reason, and they don't put them in the news for a reason. They don't want people to know these things. They don't want people who are already oppressed to know how oppressed they are. And they don't want to encourage anyone to step forward or to ask questions. So this censorship that we experience on a daily basis is very intentional. It's meant to keep us quiet. It's meant to keep people afraid. It's made to keep people uninformed. So especially marginalized people who are always the leaders, by the way, the so-called civil rights movement, the liberation movement in the 1960s and 70s was led by Black Americans, but it did not stop with us. It spawned other movements for change, the anti-war movement, the feminist movement, the environmental movement. And that is what happens when the powers that be allow a mass movement to take place. And that's why it was crushed, of course. And the same forces now, and it's ironic, we're now told to love these intelligence agencies because they're investigating Trump. But these are the people who crushed that movement very, very deliberately. And so yes, marginalized people are the ones who are attacked first, because they generally are the ones who will lead, because they suffer the most.
Absolutely. So before, when you were talking about, when we're children, we go, la, 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 we don't want to hear. I'm reminded of someone connected to me who always used to tell me, no politics at the dinner table. This isn't the place for it. You're not allowed to speak about that here. And it reminds me of something else that I read, which said that those who say that they're not interested in politics, or who don't have an interest in politics, are those who are privileged enough that they don't have to have an interest in politics, because they don't feel the burn from the effect of what is being done. I assume you'd agree with that too.
Yeah, I think so, but I think there's a lot of fear too. I think people know if you stick your neck out, they know that they're going to suffer. And, people may appear to be, some people are truly apathetic, but there are people who make a decision to be quiet because they know it can be dangerous to speak up. And sometimes it's privilege, sometimes it's fear, sometimes it's I'm just gonna go along to get along. And people have enough in their lives. They're housed and fed and they're employed, and even if they see what it is that needs to be changed, they don't want to risk it. So some of that is, it's complicated. Sometimes it's acquiescence, sometimes it's apathy, but I think very often it's fear. I think people know. They know what happens when you stand up.
It's like Pandora's box. If they open it, they're not quite sure what they're going to get, or if they'll be able to cope with it.
I was thinking of what's the old saying, the nail that sticks up gets hammered down. And I think people know that consciously, and sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously. And there's a lot of fear.
Margaret, since you invoked two words which I've spent most of my journalistic career writing about, which is intelligence agencies, it has reminded me that I was emailed a question for you from our mutual friend David Swanson.
Ah, hi David.
And David, of course, is a two-time Nobel Peace Prize nominee, amazing anti-war activist, one of the most incredible anti-war activists I've ever met in my life. He's a beautiful human being. He's an author, a radio show host, and the director of worldbeyondwar.org. But he has emailed me this question. He said, ask Margaret Kimberley for me why she treasonously refuses to believe our brave intelligence community.
Well, first of all, this expression intelligence community is very troubling. I mean, talk about propaganda. These are intelligence agencies, and they were always called intelligence agencies. Suddenly, overnight, they became an intelligence community, like, I don't know, like a kid's show, like Sesame Street or a cartoon or something. So I refuse to use the term intelligence community. They are intelligence agencies, the surveillance agencies, the surveillance state, the intelligence apparatus, any of those terms I will use before I'll use intelligence communities. These people are the enforcers. They are the cops who keep us in line, who commit literally murder abroad, who interfere in the rights of other nations and other people, who destroyed the, as I was saying, the liberation movement in this country that was called the Counterintelligence Program, COINTELPRO, which we discovered, by the way, because a brave group of activists actually raided an FBI office. That's how we found out COINTELPRO existed. But we found out about informers throughout the movement, throughout the Black Panther movement, some of whom were murdered outright, some of whom they stirred up rumors and created internecine warfare. These agencies are terrible. They do not exist for our benefit. They exist to keep us oppressed, to keep us silent, and to harm those people who still choose to speak up. So yes, and this word treason is being bandied about so much in the United States. Donald Trump is a traitor because allegedly he's in league with Putin. I mean, it's and the word treason, people don't even know what they're talking about. The definition of treason in America refers to times of war. We're not at war with anybody. So even if it is true, and I don't believe it, that Trump was Putin's puppet, he still wouldn't be a traitor. None of us should be considered traitors. But these are agencies that lie. I remember when we first started hearing the intelligence agencies say that Russia interfered in the election. And I would say to people, are these the same intelligence agencies who told us there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq? Is it the same people? So yes, maybe I am pleading.
Or the same intelligence agencies who were caught out drug smuggling, funding wars, shipping guns.
Absolutely, everything we're told not to do. They brought in heroin from Southeast Asia, cocaine from Latin America. They assisted in bringing crack cocaine to the United States, which laid waste to so many poor communities. So these are terrible, terrible people. So I'm quite proud of the fact that I do not believe what they have to say.
So, Margaret, where do you see this going? Do you think that we can build off people power, that we can again form a mass movement? Do you see this fight to free Julian as that significant to this generation, as I believe it is?
Oh, I think it's very significant, and we have to fight for him. We have to fight against the U.S. government, the British government, the Australian government. I mean, look at the Australians. What have they? He's the citizen of that country, and they've just happily gone along with the way he's been treated. The U.S. effort to snatch him up and indict him and put him away forever. So we have to speak against them, the Ecuadorians, who I am sure have been pressured terribly. And of course, now they're being pressured, they're being promised money, and they're being promised weapons, in order to push him out of the embassy. So we have to oppose all of them. We have to speak out against all of them. And it can be difficult because people have been propagandized so terribly. So the press, the corporate media doesn't really talk about Assange that much. They're hoping people forget him and give up on him. But I think we have to be very vocal in forums like this, online, and protest. We should be protesting. You know, Ecuador has an embassy. They've got consulates in New York. They have a UN office here in New York. We should be, and it's something we have to step up and make ourselves really physically visible to people so that the world knows that he's not been forgotten, and we understand the importance of defending him and helping him regain his freedom.
We've discussed how the veneer of democracy falls away and the veneer of international law falls away. We've seen Julian's gone to the UN twice. They've ruled in his favor and ruled that he's arbitrarily detained. The Inter-American Court of Human Rights has ruled in his favor and said that he should be set free. The US, the UK, and Ecuador, well, not Ecuador, but particularly the US and UK, are thumbing their nose at all of those rulings and blatantly violating international law and what they're doing. And what the realization that our discussion just gave me now is that when all of those mechanisms of so-called democracy and international law fail, it comes down to just people power. It's all we've got left.
Yeah, that is all we have left is people power. And I think when supposedly democratic nations behave so undemocratically that they ignore the law, I think it gives, it proves the lie to their claim of being democracies. This word is used so much. I mean, it's the first thing, Americans especially, it's the first thing they talk about. We have a democracy. Russia doesn't have a democracy. Putin's an authoritarian. We have democracy, and we do not. We don't. And it's important for us to say that too, because we have a country that routinely ignores the law, routinely violates the law. And their attitude is, what are you going to do about it? We have the military might, we have the money, we have the power to crush other countries and crush other people. So they ignore the law routinely in order to get what they want.
And they're violating the law, you know, at the street level in terms of the police violence against the citizenry, and then they are violating the law in the sense of the DNC and this type of stuff, the political violations, and then the international law. So it's I guess from the top to the bottom, but they've got full spectrum violation.
Yes, they do. Yeah, we have, you made reference to our police state in this country. The United States imprisons more people, both in sheer numbers and the percentage of its population. There's no other country with as many people behind bars as the United States, and that is inherently undemocratic. More than 2 million people incarcerated, half of them are Black. I believe, I think it's 20% of all the people imprisoned on the planet are Black Americans. That's how bad it is. We have an armed police force who routinely, an average of 3 times every day, kill people. More than 1,000 people are killed by the police every day in this country. And so this is not a democratic country. This is not a country that can talk about human rights. This is not a country that can scold other people and lecture them about their human rights violations when this is done so routinely here. And no, people don't like to hear it, but I don't care. I I'm talking facts. I'm talking numbers. No one can dispute anything I just said. And so this is a country with draconian sentences for drugs, for all kinds of things, terrible racial disparities of all kinds. So we have a pretty bad human rights situation in this country. Also, the number of poor people. We have an increased amount of poverty, the government austerity, and that is also undemocratic, to consign a group of people to be poor forever. And that's pretty much how our country runs.
And wherever you see the violence and the violation of law, it's coupled with impunity, which is what allows it to continue to be perpetuated. Because without the impunity, if there was actual accountability, then we would have a chance of actually diminishing that over time. And we see that impunity. You've mentioned 3 police officers a day killing people. We don't see 3 police officers a day being charged and going to prison. We're like, if we see 1 a year, ending up in prison for what they do. We see the DNC, the fraud in the DNC related to the Bernie campaign and the donations and every other thing. A couple of people resigned from their positions, but there's no the overall, and then they get hired straight onto Hillary's campaign. So the overall message is, you commit these crimes, we'll look after you, everything will be fine. In fact, you'll continue to prosper from it. And then at the international level, again, there's impunity, because the US and the UK have completely thumbed their nose at international law, completely thumbed their nose at the UN rulings, and they continue to do whatever they like. How do we break that impunity?
Well, I think we have to say what you just said, and remind people of how these countries, these nations behave, of the lies that are told in the press. And I think it's increasingly difficult for them to get that message across. That's why they have to become increasingly strident. So the corporate media go on and on about Russia here. It's horrible. I try to avoid watching the news. I watched the news recently. It was terrible. It really made me sick. And the other countries, the lies they tell to claim that they have a right to destroy Syria, or to claim that Vladimir Putin would decide to poison a spy he freed 10 years ago. So I think the impunity problem is something that we can oppose by telling the truth. And I think we have to encourage other people to be brave. We have to show our own courage and encourage others to. I mean, the United States, if we don't have anything else in the world, we have lawyers, we have attorneys everywhere. And I think there should be an effort to make sure that there is a group of people who, if they do get their hands on Julian, to fight against it, to file a lawsuit, to do something. So I think we have to show our own courage, and we have to encourage others to do so as well. And we have to always point out the wrongdoing, and so that people know the impunity as it is, instead of shrugging their shoulders and saying, well, this is the way things work, that people at least know that it's wrong, and make it harder and harder for them to, for their behavior to be acceptable.
So chip away at the ignorance.
Chip away at the ignorance, and to act in mass. It's been, in this country, it's been a long time. It's been since the 70s since there were large-scale mass movements. That's a couple of generations. And I don't think it's impossible to resurrect that. It's something I'm committed to doing. But it takes some bravery to do that also. And there are a lot of people who are taken in. It can seem discouraging in trying to tell our truth to everyone, but I think there are enough people to believe it. All you don't need everybody to start a movement. You need a committed group of people. It can start very small, but it can grow, and that's their incentive to keep lying, because they know that people want to fight back. They know it. That's why they work so hard to maintain the lies.
In New Zealand, I was a part of two very large, proportionally to our population, extremely large movements that got full saturation into the public of our narratives and of the information, and put very significant pressure on the government, and even to the point where the media were forced to constantly cover them because they had no choice. So when your movement is big enough, the media actually do have to come to heel and begin to cover them. Both of those movements were built on principles of inclusion. And so that's what we're trying to do here as well. So each of them was issue-based, and anybody who was standing for that issue was welcome. There was no judgment based on political preferences or any kind of background whatsoever. It was just uniting around those issues. And that's what I saw work. And I think the civil rights movement for most of that decade anyway was also an inclusive movement. We saw people from across the full spectrum coming together on this issue.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And it spawned other issues of regarding inclusivity. So they were successful. I think we have to figure out how to maintain our integrity and to know, now that we've been through it, to know about the reaction that always follows. And that is a challenge and something that has to be acknowledged. But you see what they do, the Occupy movement was popular, oh my goodness, it's been 6 or 7 years since the Occupy movement. It started here in New York City, obviously, Occupy Wall Street. That's why they crushed that. We still have this term, the 1%. People have a greater understanding of income inequality. And the term Occupy Wall Street, it named the villain, which is capital. And but during the Obama administration, all the encampments they were crushed. I think there were problems with Occupy too, and its leaderless formation. I think that was a problem. I sort of see why you would want to go that way, but I think it ended up being one of the things that made it easy to be gotten rid of. But it's people are restive, and all they need is for a group of people to name and shame the individuals and the groups that are continuing our oppression, and they would get attention. And as you say, the media couldn't ignore Occupy. It started in a park near Wall Street, but it spread across the country. There were Occupy encampments
across the world, 2,000 cities.
And so they managed to stamp that out. But I don't think they'll be able to do that forever. And I think conditions will change enough and worsen enough that more people will become active. There are signs of another economic bubble, another economic collapse. I think the system is being held together with, spit and rubber bands, frankly. Mm-hmm. First of all, they just gave them money. They bailed out the banks and bailed out the criminals who created this havoc around the world. But I don't think it can go on forever. And so I think this restive population is going to rise up.
It's interesting when you said that the enemy was capital, because when we have dug deep into the Snowden files and looked into the structure of the NSA is the great big spying engine, but who directs the NSA and tells them who to spy on is in fact capital. the Federal Reserve Bank is what the NSA calls a customer of the NSA. The Federal Reserve Bank can write a customer information needs request, which is their euphemism for the orders to the NSA for who to spy on and what information to gather. They can write those any day of the week and use the NSA to obtain that information for explicit financial gain. So I think you're absolutely correct when you say that capital is the enemy, and that Occupy did a good job of, if nothing else, giving us that narrative, absolutely, of the 1%, that creating a commonplace understanding that that was the root of the evil that we're seeing manifest in hundreds and thousands of different ways all around us. But on the other side of it, and I was heavily involved too in the Occupy movement, on the other side of the coin, we had a solution. Our solution was to create a new society, basically, where we had no dependence whatsoever on the state. And it actually worked for a few weeks. And it probably would have worked just fine if we hadn't been crushed by physical force, which is ultimately 3 months later what did happen to the Occupy movement. Is after the smears and the attempts to divide and conquer, they just came and crushed it with physical force. And I think WikiLeaks is a powerful example of a model that that the agencies have not been able to yet crush by force. And I don't think they entirely know what to do when they hit up against something like that. And so the advent of technology, because WikiLeaks is technology driven in terms of the encryption and the distributed servers all around the world, and the free flow of information has become a very powerful force to be reckoned with. And I hope that regardless of what happens to WikiLeaks, I think that we all need to walk in those shoes and to create, like Occupy spawned 2,000 occupations, we need to spawn 2,000 WikiLeaks.
Yeah, I think so. But we also have to learn lessons. I think Occupy here in the U.S. did not have. It was the start of a demand about inequality. But for example, my colleague Glenn Ford said they should have asked for nationalizing the banks, having the the government or even the states take over the banks. Some very basic demand like that. And but instead we see now it's very sad. It's so funny the projection that Americans go on and on about oligarchs in Russia or some other place, but the richest man in the world is American. Jeff Bezos, and the Amazon guy, who has huge contracts with the CIA, who's the sole owner of the Washington Post. There are cities all over the country competing to host his, they're calling it Amazon HQ or something. But essentially Amazon, this man who's the richest person on the planet, worth more than $100 billion, is demanding concessions from cities. So cities strapped for cash are offering free land, are offering tax abatements. And they're trying to, one city says, we'll give you 10 acres of land. The other one says, no, we'll give you 20. And so another one says, no, we'll give you 30. You don't have to pay taxes for 10 years. No, you never have to pay any taxes. I mean, this is what happens when we don't have a coherent demand. And we live under billionaire rule. And that's one of the biggest challenges to having democracy, to have these, you've seen the statistics where the small group of people have more wealth than half the people in the world. I mean, it's awful to live this way. And it's you cannot have democracy, you cannot have freedom when billionaires run governments and run our lives. And what was my point? Okay, that has to be a coherent demand. So when we reconvene, and we should not abandon Occupy, we should not abandon that idea. But I think when we do regroup and come back together, we have to talk about what we can do differently, and who it is we can name and what it is we have to demand. We have to demand freedom from capital, freedom from money.
That I think is a almost brilliant place to leave it, except I do just want to ask you one thing that we have asked our guests on previous vigils. In the event, which I hope will come as soon as possible, that Julian Assange can sit here and watch this live stream and see that you came here in solidarity with him, what message would you like to give Julian?
What would I like to give him? You know, I assume at this point, having been stuck in the embassy and now having been cut off from communication from visitors, he has to be discouraged. But I would want him to know there are millions of people around the world who believe in him, who oppose the people who have oppressed him so terribly, and that he has millions of friends and people who believe in what it is he has done, and he's not alone. And it's not just those of us online right now, but there are people all over the world who want to expose the corruption, want to expose the governments, want to expose the corporations who create so much havoc in the world and create so much human suffering. And he has comrades everywhere and people who have always believed in him. That's what I would want him to know.
Thank you so much for that. That was very moving.
Oh,
very moving. And I do fervently hope that sooner than later Julian gets to hear that message himself.
Yes. Well, that's why they've cut him off. They don't want him to know.
They don't want him to know, but I think he does. I think he does.
They don't want him to communicate, but they also don't want him to hear from the millions of people who support him.
Yeah, he certainly is aware of the existence of this movement and of these vigils, even though he can't unfortunately partake in them or view them. He is aware of it, and I know that is a huge source of comfort to him. And as those crowds of protesters outside the embassy, I mean, we saw, I think, 500 or 600 people on June 19th demo outside the Ecuadorian embassy, and they stood directly under his window and chanted, "We are here with you, Julian. We are here with you, Julian." And his window was actually open so that he could hear that chanting. So he is not alone, and people can bring that comfort even in the worst of circumstances. Margaret, I have to let you go. I thank you so much for being here. It's been a treat for me that I will not forget to be able to speak with you. So thank you so much. And I would also give you the same appeal that I gave Caitlin, which is please continue to use your platform to tell people about these events, this movement, about the millions of people who are supporting Julian. Let's break that mainstream agenda to dehumanize him and to make people believe it's socially unacceptable to support him. It's not. It is very socially acceptable, and more people are waking up to that every day. So thank you so much for being a part of this.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be a part of it. Thank you.